The way the national statement's couched, there are 4 principles: respect, research merit and integrity, justice, beneficence and respect, and then they talk about risk. The principles, very simply, research merit means, is this worth doing? So when you're applying in your application, you have to validate why this question's worth doing it. How do we do that? As scholars, we do it against the literature. There is a literature of authority out there saying, here's what we know about this problem, here's what we now need to know, therefore I'm going to ask these questions. That's all you're doing. That's the lit review role in applications for grants, same for us, in your theses and so forth. Integrity refers to, also merit may be a pragmatic. And a lot of our research is in, say, scholarship of teaching and learning. It may be linked to industry contracts. You know, a company is wanting to evaluate their staff development program. That's a really practical research project. That can be the merit that you need. That this has been recognized as a need within this company. I've been contracted to do it. Therefore, I now need to seek ethics approval to do the things we need to do to achieve that outcome. Integrity is about the quality of the research methodology and method. Now, there is a critique that we sometimes get, is that you as a committee are not authorised to critique my methods. Now, strictly, we're not a methods committee, but the methods that you're proposing give us an indication that you're meeting these principles. What do I mean by that? The methods and methodology you've got to demonstrate that those are the authorised, validated methods within your discipline. So we've got lots of disciplines in the university. To take a really facile example, you wouldn't take an experiential survey and use it in the chemistry lab. That's just not sensible. But there are disciplines which are much closer, and your job is to say, in my field, this is the kind of inquiry and the kind of methodology that my colleagues use that are published, and therefore I'm going to use it. And that's your validation, that it's appropriate to the questions you ask in the context that you're doing it. And then you're going to describe the particular methods and how you've constructed them and built them up. And again, we're looking for internal validity, sensible design that, and very often I'll get, for example, a design that said, this is what is used, this is the tool that's used by people in my field, and therefore I'm going to adapt it. Now that's a very good, sensible thing. Does it look like it's designed with enough samples, the right kind of participants and so forth? That's the things we'll look for to see that it's internally coherent. That's what we mean by integrity. So there is no design, there's no method which is out of bounds. The only method that doesn't work is the one that's irrelevant to your topic or your discipline. So, and you've got to make a very good case why you might be borrowing from another discipline. The new humanities do that. They do it very powerfully, but that's context relevant. So, justice is about fairness of recruitment. That's the really good indicator. Are the people you're engaging the appropriate people? Do you need key informants? Do you need targeted individuals? Is it a population subsample? What is relevant? And have you given them a fair opportunity to be recruited? Is your recruitment strategy fair and just? And that's the best indicator that you're dealing with justice. It's in there largely due to the rather sorry history of mid-20th century medical research, which was fundamentally unjust in many of its precepts. And we will look at some of the principles that underlie why you're doing it. So there may be, for example, a research method frame, which is just fundamentally wrong. And the classic old one was the notion that people's skulls somehow represented their intelligence, and it was always culturally laden right across the world. For a long time, there were assumptions that the shape of a human being's skull would somehow tell them something about their cultural behaviour. And, that's something which has now gone out with it. Well, we hope it's gone out with the ARC. But if I saw an application that came in and said, well, we're going to do some phrenology because that's going to tell us about linguistic connections, we'll say, look, that's just fundamentally wrong. It's unjust. It's been proven not to be appropriate. But mostly justice, we're dealing with how you're recruiting your participants. Beneficence comes back to that benefit to the participants. I talked about that earlier. It's actually, on the face of it, a very obvious one, but it's actually really hard to demonstrate in most cases. The best most people can do is say, we will do no disbenefit. We will ensure that our participants are safe, whether it's safe physically, culturally, emotionally, reputationally, and we'll ensure that we do no harm. That old mantra from the medics, first of all, do no harm, which interestingly it keeps getting quoted. It's been made up probably about the 1890s and claimed to be ascribed to the Greeks. It's quite an interesting little ethical dilemma. But anyhow, you can demonstrate. And how do you do that? Well, you look at risk. What are the risks? I'll come back to that in a minute. How will you deal with them? What are you asking people to do? And we will look at that package of how you're interacting with people, and is there a potential for doing them more harm than good? And there certainly shouldn't be. If all of these are in place, the respect principle comes through. We need to respect our participants. As I said, they don't need us, full stop. We need to respect that. How do we judge that as a committee? We look at things like how you will interact with them. Are you asking them all to come into the university, or are you happy to go out to their community centre? Are you talking to them about when would it suit you to meet me? How would you like to do it? Have I given you the opportunity to withdraw? Have I given you informed consent? Do you know what I'm doing? Am I using language that you understand? There's been a habit, and there's still some academics that like to talk in intellectual waffle, this sort of pompous, arrogant nonsense that you hear some academics using. If you're talking to a community person, to a group of children, you don't talk like that, because what you're saying is, I have no respect for you, I'm God Almighty, and you're just, you just listen to me and respect me. Well, they don't. And we see examples of information sheets that even we don't understand, and we send it straight back and say, pure disrespect, you are insulting these people, and we don't accept that. So we're looking at the language, you're looking at your proposed way of interacting with your participants, the kinds of questions you're asking, the kind of language you're using. And that's a very good mark of respect. Finally, the risk one. The national statement is really clear about risk. It defines it in very, very simple ways. There's negligible, low, moderate, or high. And we'll come back to the consequence. There's two groups, negligible and low, and moderate and high. And we'll talk about that divide in a minute. They're defined in very simple terms. There's no such thing as risk-free research. So don't say to me, there is no risk in this research. There will be. There's inevitably, there's risk in just getting up in the morning, living. But then you'll come back to me, and as I've had from a number of researchers, if I tell you what the risks are, you won't let me do this research, will you? And I say, well, actually, it's not up to me to let you do it or not. But it's not actually true. If you don't tell me there's risk, then I'll come back to you and say, well, tell me what the risks are. So silence is very loud. If there is risk, what I say to everyone is put it on the table. Be really honest. Maybe even overstate it. If you're really worried, put it there. Because once it's out in the open, then you can ask the really important questions. You can say, is this risk worth having for this research? So the balance of import and risk. So if it's, it's the next wonder drug it's going to cure cancer worldwide, then yeah, we might have some fairly high risks to get there, but it will be worth it. You might have to make that argument a bit strongly. But it might be an ultimate risk as a patient dies. And that's pretty serious. But you might be able to make the case that says this is worth doing. If it's something perhaps slightly less of an impact, a lower risk, a lot of the research we do is fairly low-level social process stuff. We really can't have a higher risk. So you try and balance it. The national statement talks about balance. And we've used that part of the national statement, not often, but on a few occasions, to say, we don't accept the balance between the import of this research and the risk that you're prepared to have in there. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is that then you look at this risk and think, now what am I going to do about this? And there's two things you can do. One is you can go back to the design of the research and say, what am I going to do to minimize this risk? And often it's not rocket science. It's something really simple. It may be dropping a question from your survey. It may be finding a different place to hold your focus groups. It may be just dropping out one little part or modifying one method. And we can all do that. And often that just brings the risk level down. Very simple, not rocket science. The other side of the equation is now the risks are out there. What am I going to do in the event that it actually happens? And it doesn't, actually most risks don't eventuate. But if they do, what am I going to do to support the participant in order, to look after them? And there are lots of ways of dealing with that. There are services, there are support mechanisms, there's reporting mechanisms and so forth. But having them on the table allows you to have that discussion. So this is the power of that of being honest, open, and we'll never knock something back, however high risk it is, if the design wrapped around it is sensible and is balanced. As simple as that.